One of my little hobby horses is you look through the New Testament, and what the early apostles did is they didn't actually present a theory about the Christian faith in terms of this is what the cross did and this is exactly what. They just talked about Jesus. They talked about we knew him, we saw him, we touched him. This is what he did, and he died on the cross, and he can save you. But it wasn't a theoretical sort of analysis of salvation. It was Jesus. And I really do think that the church has lost confidence in the greatest gift we've received, and we can recover that. But we have to, I think, have a generosity, a care for people, an interest in people, in sharing Jesus with them. Thank you very much, Father Daniel. It is a real pleasure to be here this evening. And yeah, that's the question that I suggested we might think about this evening. I don't know how you would answer it. I don't know what signs and some of the media that you've connected with, where there's been this indication of a shift in attitudes towards faith, spirituality, church. But in the past 2 or 3 years, the secular press have begun to report headlines such as this, that the church, that the Christian faith, that the nation as a whole is experiencing a spiritual awakening. And so what I want to do this evening is give some evidence for that, just a little bit of background to back that thought up. And then to think through some of the studies that have taken place, but also some anecdotal stories about what that actually looks like in our time. And then after that, when I have the conversation with Father Daniel, we'll think about what are the implications for the church, what that might mean for us in the church in responding to that. So on the next slide, we have this graph, which is from a research survey by Scripture Union, who, through their interviews with those in the bracket of 16 to 25-year-old, labeled Generation Z or Gen Z from America, they saw from their survey that in 2018, only 4% of 16 to 25-year-olds actively engaged in church, perhaps once a month. Go into 2024, and that has risen to 16%. So that is a 400% increase in church engagement in that particular age profile. Now, as we know, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and so you have to test those survey results. But some other indications are that Bible sales. So in terms of Bible sales, back in 2019, similar time to that survey, roughly around 200,000 Bibles are sold in the UK in 2018. It's still the bestseller of a single book in the country. But in 2024, we're again at 400,000, a doubling of Bible sales during that time. And then the third piece of research recently is around Christmas service attendance. And again, the analysis through the survey sample that they used was that something in the region of 60% of that Generation Z will have attended church at some point over the Christmas period. Now, these are significant shifts from where we were back before the COVID pandemic. So as we hear that, as the secular press begins to report it, I don't know if you are in any way interested in football and that, but if you see professional Premier League football matches now, you will consistently see professional footballers thanking God for the blessing of scoring a goal, giving glory to Jesus Christ in their interviews, and referencing their faith. They carry their Bibles into the dressing room. This is a shift in the public perception of the Christian faith, whereas before, back in the 2000s, we were in the state as a nation where the secular agenda was ruling the roost. I don't know if you remember Richard Dawkins. He wrote The God Delusion. And he, along with Christopher Hitchens and two other commentators, were known as the Four Horsemen of Atheism. And they were basically saying, as Dawkins did in that book, that to believe in God is to be deluded. And now, ironically, Richard Dawkins has said, I'm a cultural Christian. I really appreciate what the Christian faith has brought to this nation. Much has changed in the last 25 years. Now, what might that mean in terms of what people are experiencing as the shift? So we're just going to go on to the next slide. And I just want to reflect something of what commentators and analysts are experiencing. And I'm going to tell an anecdotal story for each of these shifts, because in the last 2 years, my work with this particular generation has been with something called The Send, and we've connected with over 15,000 16 to 25-year-olds engaging in the Christian faith. And this has been our experience as well. So the first shift is from the secular to the spiritual. The secular agenda that seeks to remove faith and any sense of an external reality, of spiritual reality of God, or whatever name you might want to give to that, to remove that from the human experience as something that isn't actually relevant or coherent. That has grown in its influence over our nation. And the result is that those in that 16 to 25-year-old age bracket have grown up, in effect, in a secular society. Now, what that means is that you can define reality with what you can see and taste and touch with your senses. This is reality. Anything beyond that is not coherent. And then, in terms of your understanding of yourself, you are not referencing yourself by any God or faith or external reality. You create and construct your reality for yourself. So it becomes a very self-centered, a self-defining existence. Now, the promise of that was freedom, was that we would find ourselves, create ourselves, throw off the restrictions and trappings of religion, and we would be freed as a human species. But actually, what has come to be a reality, particularly for that generation, is a deep sense of dissatisfaction, an increasingly anxious experience as they self-define, and something in which they have discovered a search for meaning that has not been found in the realities that they've been presented with. So, as we experience life today in the UK, which I think feels increasingly challenging when you think of an economic reality where there is less hope in terms of for a career, for finance, for owning your own home, for financial security for this generation, in which politically it feels like those who are leading politically, whatever your particular persuasion might be, have lost any sense of being able to provide answers which we can have confidence in which the international scene for the world feels incredibly vulnerable and volatile, where the climate crisis threatens the future and existence of our world. In the midst of all of that, there is a generation that's been told we have what it takes to solve all of that. But because secularism has had a long run now, I think there's increasingly a sense that its promises have been proven false, and that what people then begin to look for is something beyond that which gives them hope. And as Augustine says, that we were created for God, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in him. And that's what it's felt like in this generation. So I'll tell you a really interesting story from a church that I'm working with at the moment. So we'll call this young woman Emma. She's at university. She's at second year at university, and she is looking at the experience of her friends. And she sees that in the experience of her friends, in what they're doing with their spare time, whether it's watching Netflix, having different experiences, and seeking to just entertain themselves, she begins to have this experience of, this feels meaningless. This doesn't feel like it's answering our questions. It doesn't feel like it's satisfying. It just feels like it's occupying time in a desperate sense to find a sense of occupation and entertainment. And as she thinks about her friends, a phrase comes into her mind. She doesn't know where it's come from. She's not from a Christian family. She's never been to church. But she has this phrase in her mind: they need Jesus Christ. And she can't get rid of this phrase. So she goes home, and this was at this Christmas holidays just gone, and she finds the one Christian that she was at school with, and she meets up with her and says, what does this mean? And who is Jesus Christ? She studies the Bible. She begins to look at the understanding of the Bible, and realizes that there is credible reasons for us to trust this book. And as she reads it, she reads about Jesus, and she believes that this is the person who could, as it were, save her, could give meaning to her life. And she begins to actively engage with church, read her Bible, follow Jesus Christ. Her testimony, through her friend who I met last week, was that her life has been transformed. And so she's moved from being somebody living within this secular reality to having a deep spiritual experience. And that's happened in the course of just a few months. And that is happening again and again for this generation. Second thing is the fragmentation of the family is well known. And so they've been labelled a fatherless generation, in which there's so often single-parent families and experiences of that. And again, the psychology around that is shown to be very challenging, notwithstanding all the hard work that parents do. And so the hope or the secular line on this was that actually the family is a social construct. We don't need this. We can explore it in different ways, and we can define it ourselves. And now what is happening in this generation is that people are looking for community with values. And so they look to the church now. And as they come into the church, they find community. They find family. Another church that I've been involved in, they saw a young man who was the centre forward for the semi-professional football club just walk into church one day because he'd been reading his Bible and he'd become convinced of who Jesus Christ is. A roofer who was repairing the church roof had a spiritual experience in which he said, there is a peace in this building that I've never experienced before, and he started attending church. His girlfriend came, somebody else in the church who was in their age range who knew them began to meet with them. And then they said, could we join? Could we become members? Could we get involved with this? And they were put into this group with 4 retired gentlemen to help read the Bible with them. And they loved it. And the whole idea that actually this was uncool and that they wouldn't be interested in somebody in that age range was proven wrong, because they found family, they found community, and they found belonging with meaning. So that's the second movement. The anxiety is well known, and there is a mental health challenge for this generation. I really do believe that the lie of secularism, that we can define ourselves, has been proven to be false because of the anxiety that is produced. The whole social media and culture in which we have to present this perfect picture of ourselves, and who we've defined ourselves to be, it brings so much pressure. And what I've discovered over the last couple of years working with this generation is that yes, there are lots of mental health issues, but as they come to faith in Jesus Christ, they discover a purpose in him. And as they begin to follow him and be involved within church, they actually don't want to just attend church. They want to actively participate and live out this faith. And so we've done lots of work in which young people in this age range have been sharing faith with those around them, that they've been proud to be known as followers of Jesus Christ, and they've actively began to be involved in the work of the church right from the beginning, with a passion, with a joy, with a boldness about their faith. And then finally, amoral, that's really just to say that secularism says there's no givenness to our morality. And so therefore there's freedom to explore without boundaries, and you can live your life in any way you want to. And again, that would seem logically to say there's freedom in that, throwing off restraint. But actually, this generation, even before they're necessarily Christian or engaging in faith, they are consistently drinking less, having less sex, trying to work out how to live an ordered life, because they've discovered the disorder of something without boundary is something that has been deeply unsettling and vulnerable. And so as people begin to engage in faith, we might have thought in the past that the Bible was this old-fashioned rule book that restricted people's lives, but they're finding a way of life, a pattern of life, the maker's instructions, as we would say, and they begin to follow in the way of Jesus Christ and the teachings of the Bible. So these are some of the shifts that I've begun to see that have been reported in the press, that are the stories, the underlying experience of these younger people as they begin to engage in faith, that the secular press are beginning to report on. The last thing to say is just to say that I have written a book with a friend of mine called Anne called Awaken, the Lord is Doing a New Thing. This is not really an analysis of what I've been saying today, but it's much more of an offering to the church of saying, what does this mean about how we might need to engage with this spiritually and structurally? What changes might we need to be working on if we sense that God is at work awakening this nation again spiritually? So I offer you that. We're going to have some questions in a little bit, but Father Daniel's going to start with some questions first.
Thank you, John, for your words, which I think underlie an encouragement, don't they, for us to see that God is doing something new here. This all seems to have happened in the last decade or so. The stack has sort of moved very quickly. From your point of view, are there things that have precipitated this?
So I think one of the really interesting things is that, and you're a real example of this, Father Daniel, in terms of media. So with the media that is available online, there is access to so much content and information. And what we're finding is that these younger generations are researching, they're engaging, they're listening to podcasts. There's people on TikTok and Instagram who are sharing faith, so that the Christian faith has permeated the new culture as it's begun to evolve and develop. And that's felt like there has been a real open space for that to begin to really be fruitful. So I think that's one thing. I think that in the shift of generations in the last decade, if you think of that Generation Z, 16 to 25-year-olds, they have not grown up within the church. So they've never rejected church. So the majority of the previous generations rejected a church quite often that had lost confidence because of secularism. And yet this younger generation have never rejected Jesus Christ, never rejected faith. And so as they begin to look for, how do I want to live my life? Who's got anything to offer me? Faith doesn't become something that they go, oh, I've rejected that. That was something my parents had. And their parents quite often didn't have faith. And so they're going, I'm curious. I'm fascinated in this idea of actually that there is a spiritual part of me and there might be a God who I could engage with. And so that sense of not having been Christian, they're almost pre-Christian generation, has given them a freedom to explore and be curious. And then there's been the resources and the online content for them to engage with.
I think that's particularly true on the online thing, isn't it? That the people that churches are encountering who are coming through our doors maybe for the first time are often well researched before they meet us, and may have spent literally hundreds of hours watching content. And that could be anything from the more wild and weird, like the sort of Joe Rogan type stuff, to Bishop Barron. And the people I've found will dive really deep in on questions. Within a few minutes, we're on to Thomas Aquinas. But this is terrifying. These are already strong swimmers in a sense, intellectually.
Yeah, they are.
And others I've found, and I'm sure you found this too, have come on the back of profound, sometimes sudden experiences. Maybe a dream the night before, that, or as you said, that girl Emma, with that tantalizing thought that just kept nagging her, that was sort of scratching that itch.
Another piece of research said that those who are coming into the church, up to something like 25% would attest to some spiritual experience before coming that might have started their journey of faith, or might have just prompted them to come. My best story ever is an Oxford University student who had a dream about Jesus coming to her and presenting the Bible to her in a dream and say, read this is my word. And then she woke up with a sense of the fear of the Lord, going, I don't have a Bible. And then she turned on her light, and there was a Bible by her bedside, a physical Bible. And
wow.
And this is well attested through a church minister in Oxford that I was speaking to, and it feels like, because there is a spiritual openness, God is doing supernatural things and calling people to himself.
Yes, I noticed over the weekend there's been a series of really interesting articles incidental to this. One was from a diocesan priest who is in the deliverance and healing side of things, who wrote a really lengthy piece in the Times. And then there was an article, I think in the Telegraph, about footballers coming to faith, saying that that Gen Z are losing, and particularly Gen Z men are losing the herd immunity to Christianity. That herd immunity is breaking down, and that faith is becoming something not seen as marginal, but okay to sort of talk about. And it strikes me as well that, as you say, that sense of the supernatural is very much there in a way that it maybe wasn't a decade ago. And that 15 years ago we were probably on the zenith of the new atheist movement, and such talk would have seemed bizarre. But you can talk to people, even in, say, the tech industry, for whom spiritual practices, whether it's New Age creation practices, the use of LSD type medications to expand the mind, the sort of all that sort of, that whole spiritual smorgasbord is back in the fore. You see billboards with the word manifest, and that kind of vocabulary that wasn't there is now very, very present and is becoming increasingly kind of normal.
Yes.
In fact, it's something that other parts of the world is very normal.
Yes.
And we've been so sort of hermetically sealed in our post-Enlightenment shells that we haven't noticed that, but now we are. What churches do you think are making hay of this?
Now this is really interesting.
Put you on the spot.
No, honestly, this is one of the things that I find really, really fascinating, because there is, again, clear research that demonstrates that the churches that this younger generation are engaging with are what I call those who have a fully leaded faith. Now, they're not one tradition, so they might be Catholic or Orthodox churches. They've seen a very strong growth in attendance, number of baptisms and confirmations. And then on the other side of things, the charismatic Pentecostals that have a very enlivened spirituality, and the evangelicals have a very clear and high view of Scripture. The churches that aren't doing so well are actually the middle-of-the-road Anglicans, my tribe, and that's, I think, because in this generation, as you said, it's not just Christian faith they're interested in. There is a spiritual hunger, and they might turn to New Age practices, they might turn to paganism. There's a hunger there spiritually, but they also want a cause. They want something to live for. They want to engage in something, and so the churches that don't have a confidence in their understanding of how to follow Christ, their identity as a Christian church, have proven not to actually be attractive to this generation, because they just expect attendance and intellectual interest rather than a cause to live by and something that really brings a challenge. And it's very interesting that the response is across the generation, but it's particularly strong in young men. And that's the opposite to where we were before. And that's quite often because they are looking for something to really live for.
And I suppose you could make an argument as well that over the generations, the whole question of what is a man's purpose, has been very up in the air, hasn't it? And so you might say that masculinity has been sort of stripped away over a generation. So there's all sorts of questions over that. Some of those are good and pertinent, but also I think that's left many of that generation, I suspect, wondering, well, where am I in the great scheme of things? Am I just a marginal nuisance in society? Where is, without sounding too much like I'm going to start reading the script of Fight Club, where is my spiritual battle?
Yeah.
And I'll know it's a battle if it pinches.
Yeah.
If it makes demands on.
There's a cost.
If there's a cost, it hurts. Then and if there's a cost that I see in you, then I know that it's serious.
Yes. And I think, again, not wanting to say that we shouldn't sort of question and analyze, but you look at the work of Jordan Peterson, and so much of what he's teaching is referenced into Scripture. And then he's saying, no, this isn't something where it's just make things up for yourself, define yourself in the way that's easiest, but actually, no, there's a way to live. It's costly, it's challenging, but as he speaks in that way, it has resonated with a generation.
A friend of mine was at one of his lectures, and there were 10,000 there. And during the intermission break, the demand was for scripture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though you've essentially got this, he's not, as far as we know, a professing Christian,
No.
but he's psychologizing Genesis, Exodus,
Yes.
and everybody's leaning in.
Yeah.
And he's talking about the pain and the pinch and the ark that you have to build and the cross that you have to drag up the hill and this, and go tidy your room. And
Yes,
as I'm saying, there's a sense of give me more, like a drill sergeant. There's something that he's touching upon there. And a friend of mine who interviewed him, he's also a minister, an American Reformed pastor, and Peterson said, "You should be doing this, not me. Why are the clergy not at this point of time filling the lecture rooms?"
And I think that more and more they are. So I think that the church is beginning to regain a confidence in being able to speak of Christ, to offer scripture, to call people to follow. But I think we lost it. I think that because of the secularism, because it was so rampant and so aggressive, that the church lost a confidence. And in the generation, our generation, there was, because of the church and some of the difficulties and challenges with it, there was a rejection of that, a cynicism about it. And so if the church shared its faith confidently, there was a rejection. And it learned not to. It retreated. And so I do think that what is beginning to happen is the church is recovering its voice again.
I mean, I think that's part of your job, if I've got you right, that you're in the institution,
Yep.
arguing against the managed declining church, pushing for audacious Anglican church planting. I wonder if you can give us a sense of how that has gone for you in the last few years. I can imagine in some quarters cynicism, pushback, misunderstanding. That there are lots of battles within the C&B that you've been on that pitch for.
Yes. So in terms of, as it was then, Twitter, now X, when we presented a possibility to the Church of England that the church might not just manage decline, but it might start to form new church communities that really engaged and resonated with different stratas of our society and presented the gospel in a fresh way, there was a significant pushback from within the church authorities and certain traditions within the church, saying that it felt like we weren't honouring the traditions of the past and we were rejecting the parish model of church. And that wasn't the case at all. We really want to affirm those patterns of ministry, but we think we can do both. And so I was even reported in the Washington Post, church wars in the Church of England, just by daring to suggest we could try something different. And now I understand why. The church was feeling very vulnerable. We were in decline. We'd just been through COVID. Priests were overwhelmed and discouraged. And I pop up and say, come on everybody, let's try something new. And they found that very difficult. But over the last few years, since we began that work in 2021, we have some really credible patterns of training and models of church that honor the tradition of the past, but recontextualize it and express it in new ways. And so we are seeing churches form new churches in lots of different ways, and we are seeing the church grow again. And the statistics, again, I'm sorry about all the stats that I carry around, is that if a church starts a new church community, that church grew last year into the parish returns within the Church of England. If they didn't, they generally declined. And So the starting of something new. Now, why does that make a difference? It's because the form of church that we've developed is something that serves those who are already members of the church. But Jesus Christ commissioned the church to be those who go and make new disciples across the world. And the way that we can do that in our nation is to reform church in a way that connects with people in a different way. And so we're not against the existence one. I go to a church in my village in Buckinghamshire. We do evensong, we do 1662 matins, we do Book of Common Prayer in the morning. But in the afternoon, we do what we call cafe church. We sit round tables, we eat together, we open scripture in the middle of a meal, we sing different songs, we have children there for the first time in decades, and new people are coming to faith. One isn't better than the other, but the new is engaging with people who didn't feel there was a church for them.
Interesting. I remember when the report came out, a mutual friend of ours put it under my nose, and I remember watching the Anglican Twitter storm.
Yes.
You really are sparing time and want to waste hours. Watch the Church of England on Twitter, and someone was so riled by this that they printed a quote from your report, which they saw as negative, as a T-shirt.
Yes.
But I remember reading the report and thinking, I think some of my friends are reading this the long way round. And I never saw it in the negative, and couldn't give it the same bad press. I suppose what helped me is the time I was reading Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, which documents the resistance to communism by the churches during the Eastern Bloc and Soviet period, and how, say, someone like Father Thomas Kolakovich, planted 100 communities from Croatia up to Poland, which were essentially, they were used as described as cafe churches. They were catechetical communities that could do something that the parish church, because it had the eyes of the state on it, couldn't do. And those communities gave fruit to some incredibly muscular Christians, men and women who today are in many ways the thought leaders politically, philosophically, spiritually of Eastern Europe. And I remember reading this report and saying, I think actually what this Canon McGinley is actually arguing is for us to have a very robust backup as well.
Yeah.
Because the parish system can't only do everything, but if the cultural and political temperature changed and became colder, where there's house groups going to be that are going to keep things going and are going to draw in a sort of heroic life of the church, quietly studying under the radar, building up communities. So I don't have the T-shirt. Let's go. We don't tend to use the language of class anymore. But here's a thought. From my perspective, one of the issues with Christianity, and particularly with Anglicanism, it does seem very middle class.
Yeah.
If you've worked in estates ministries, you know that the soil there is really hard. Yeah, and you probably are ministering with minuscule resources in vast housing estates with very little infrastructure, you may be, as a clergy man or woman, one of the highest paid people in the square mile. I've done such ministry a couple of times and have a real heart for it. And it's really difficult to find resources and input that kind of talks to that constituency. I've tried Alpha, but it's never quite sat well. I mean, God bless him, Nicky Gumbel. It did look a bit Tony Blair, didn't it? Still, there's something very sort of nice and appealing and reassuring if you're in Kensington. But if you're in a housing estate in Liverpool, do those resources really touch you? I wonder if our spiritual awakening and our revival will have working class roots.
Really interesting. So we are working specifically with different classes and cultures in what we're doing. And so there is a network that we serve called Proximity that specifically has a vision to raise up indigenous leaders from those estates. So that it's not the middle class coming in from the outside, but how do we equip those leaders, and mentoring programs and investing in theirs. And what those communities have, which so often the middle class communities don't have, is a really open and integrated sense of community. You can knock on your neighbour's door, you know what's going on in their lives, and it may be messy and broken and fragmented, but there's a real sense of interconnectedness. And what we're finding is that food is one of the most significant aspects of building these new communities. And as people gather together to eat and share life together and really address the problems that they're facing, what we're finding is that there is real spiritual awakening taking place on those estates as well, but it does take a different approach. Equally, I was just last week with a group of Iranian Christians in London, and it was fascinating in the light of what's happening in Iran currently. That country has the fastest growing church in the world, Iran. It's not a Muslim country, it's actually a Christian country, but the church is underground, like you said, and many of them have come to this country, and they're now actually reaching into all of the asylum hotels and loving people and trying to serve them and share Christ with them. And so this isn't just a middle-class white intellectual revival. This is something that is really happening across different stratas of society.
I get exactly what you mean about food and fellowship.
Yeah.
In our parish in Aberdeen that my wife and I ran in our first week, this is about 20 years ago, there was a whole bunch of teenagers who would come and stand at the back of what was a sort of high churchy service of about 20 of us. There would be about 10 teenagers at the back who would, they would come every week.
Okay.
Sometimes they would chat a bit, but they would be there. And we provided them breakfast beforehand, which was very well received. Occasionally, there'd be things like they would maybe light up during the service, making sermons there along a bit. One of them infamously hates me doing this, saying this, got cut short and decided to urinate just outside the church very publicly, and didn't think there was anything wrong with that. And then when we sort of had to just gently say this isn't really appropriate, we got onto a conversation, another water conversation, about what happens in that font. He got baptised. He's now a vicar. Who's the only one in his year group at school to get a degree.
Wow.
Now he's got 2. He's ordained.
Yep.
We saw that they like taking up leadership roles.
Yep.
I said sometimes it was a bit spicy.
Yeah.
We did have some, again, another one of those teenagers. We got them leading Compline on a Sunday night. We have a movie night with them, pizza and whatnot. I remember getting a Chinese once, and they said, oh yeah, we really like Chinese food, but we realised it was just rice and chips that they liked. I said, what's this foreign muck? This is Asian food. You think? Anyway, we're leading Compline, and one of them's flicking the younger one is flicking the ear of the other one, and the leader turns around and tells him to effing well stop doing that. You just have to kind of tape that to the chin and say, well, that's where it is. But as you say, hearts of gold.
Yeah.
And incredibly time rich.
Yeah.
Incredibly time rich. When we moved to very affluent Salcombe in South Devon, it took a while for us to acclimatise to a completely different way of being and relating. I'm going to now open up to the floor for questions, but before we do, can we give Canon John a big hand of appreciation? Right at the back, Canon.
Canon John, thank you very much. I'd love to know a little bit more about the Send and the impact and how you have discipled those who have come along to some of your large events across the country.
Thank you. So the Send has held a number of large events and smaller regional events. We had 7,000 people at Wembley Arena. We did arenas in Glasgow, Belfast, and a number of other centres. And what we ask people to do in those gatherings is we ask them to have a sense of what their call might be from God. How are they going to follow Jesus Christ? And they have a chance to respond. And we form what we call spot fire communities. And these are communities that are designed to create the sort of the fire of faith within people, where people gather to pray, first of all, to encourage each other in faith, and then to encourage each other to go and share Christ with others. And that phrase I used earlier about them being bold and joyful is what we're seeing. So we have experienced leaders who oversee the network of these groups, who mentor the leaders of these communities. And they then are encouraged to dream and wonder what God might want to call them to do. And what God has done has been so varied. So there was a group in Sheffield, and in this group there were a couple of estate agents and a solicitor, and they started to pray, and they wondered, could we buy some houses and create a place for young people coming out of care who don't have a family? And so they formed a charity, got some capital, bought some houses, and they are now the primary providers of housing for children who come out of care and don't have a place to live. And they provide Christian mentors for them. So they begin to dream about justice. Another just very small sort of example is there was a group of physiotherapists who were in the NHS, and they just felt that the NHS was lacking hope. So they had a physiotherapist conference, and they thought, how can we bring hope? And so they prayed, and they felt God lead them to prepare to offer Bible verses with hope to people when they go to this conference. Somebody at the end of the conference said, do you know, I think the thing we're missing most is hope. Has anybody got any hope to offer us today? And so these young women got up on the stage and said, we'd really like to offer you some words from the Bible. And they read these passages of Scripture. People were in tears in this NHS conference because these young Christians had got together, they prayed, and they said, God, how could we bring what you've done for us into other people's lives? And so we've stopped our large events because we didn't want to just continue to call people to a large experience, because we're really convinced it has to be lived out in their lives. And we're now working on the ground with these smaller communities. But it's an absolute privilege to work with them. It really is.
Okay. Go.
Yes, I would like to ask about young people coming to churches outside the established church, if I can put it that way, the denominational church, because during the pandemic, during the lockdowns, a lot of people wanted to continue to meet, and they did. They were meeting under the radar, if I could put it that way. And so during the pandemic, there was an increase in the amount of people who were meeting in homes, home churches, in other words. Yes. And I wondered if you knew if young people, Generation Z, were going to such churches. Have you any knowledge about what might be happening there, please, Canon John?
Yeah, so I work ecumenically right across the board, and so there's something in the church nationally called the National Church Planting Networks gathering of leaders of these non-denominational churches come together with the established churches, and there is a real growth in what you, as you've just described, home church, and the hunger for community is something that is marking something of this awakening, this growth in engagement with church. And so sometimes I fear that in my denomination, the Church of England, people come into church and they try to sit as far from each other as they can, in terms of the back row, and they'll come in and occupy a separate pew, and we've lost a sense of the church being a community, a body, a sense of authentic lives shared together. And one of the things that it really feels that people are beginning to look for, and started in the pandemic actually, is actually we can't go to large gatherings. Let's form in our bubbles something authentic. And there's a beautiful story of some young adults in a city who started to do that in the pandemic. And they formed their bubble. There were 6 of them. Then when they were allowed some more, they grew. And they ended up with 6 home churches. And again, they started to say, how could we serve our community? They went and blessed a local nursery with a donation to help them care for children with families who couldn't afford nursery fees. They began to clear the park of rubbish and talk to the teenagers in the park. But when people said, where do you go to church? They said, well, in our home. And people started to come into their home. And the challenge, which we're trying to do in our organization, is how do you oversee that wisely? So there's a need for safeguarding, there's a need for good governance. We have to be careful around those things. But the authentic community of gathering, eating together, sharing lives, I think is being recovered by those kind of churches at this time. And a lot of what I do with enabling people to start new churches who aren't ordained is in homes or in small community spaces. And so there is a lot of that happening amongst that younger generation as well.
And I would add to that the generation upcoming are digitally saturated. The digital is great in many ways, but the downside is the lack of human connection. Yeah. Whether you're a sacramental church or not, I think that sort of embodied meeting people in person has become a real lifeline.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things we're trying to do here at University Chaplaincy, like tonight, is actually gather people together, rather than just do this online. Because I think there is a real need, and part of what a university should be offering is more and more of those embodied, real-time, in-person, old-fashioned ways of doing things, lest we all end up in our little bubbles, ordering Deliveroo, and going to lectures online, and never having a conversation. Living on campus myself, I found one of the experiences that is unnerving is that you could actually, day to day, if you manage yourself in a certain way, have a completely digital existence. And we want to sort of check against that. We want to give a muscle memory that says that people are important, that fellowship is important. I think the churches, wherever they are in the spectrum, can really offer that.
Very good.
Yeah, there's one more round.
Just following on from the lady's question, a lot of people were woken up to the reality of evil during their perception, and they latched onto Ephesians 6:10-20, put on the whole armour of God, and they looked at the church and they regarded the church having failed massively, going on to what this lady says. So how can the church show that it is following Jesus rather than the state in future? And how can it reach those people who are alienated by the church? They regarded the church as having failed.
Yes, I mean, it's a really, really interesting question. And I think that different churches have different charisms, callings, and different traditions and histories to work through and to offer. But what I said earlier about the younger generation looking for something that has depth and reality and real spiritual life to it is what really encourages me. And so that reality of the spiritual realm has become much more to the fore. And so how do we equip people to understand that, to discern that, to live that out in their daily lives? That requires a church that is alive spiritually. And that can be a very sacramental church. And it can be something very informal in a home. But the thing that will mark it, and I'm really convinced that this is what will begin to happen, is that it is those who are, as Jesus said to the woman at the well and in the discussion that followed in their community, it's those who worship in the Word and the Spirit, and Spirit and truth, that there is something of a spiritual depth and reality that the church is beginning to recover. I think we lost it in the secularism. I think we almost tried to pander to it, to try to be acceptable, to try to join in with a culture and to become acceptable. And now there's a growing confidence to say, no, what we have to offer is Jesus Christ, him crucified, risen again, ascended, ruling over all as the Saviour of the world. And to offer that confidently, creatively, but something with real spiritual depth. And the other part of that, just interestingly around the evil piece, is that as the world went further from the teachings of the Bible, people became more broken and under the influence of evil. And so the church is now wrestling with, how do we enable people to be set free from that? And so it's interesting, that article that I read as well in terms of deliverance ministry. I'm a fully qualified Church of England deliverance minister. And so I've done the national training. And there was an increasing demand from people saying, would you please come and help deal with this issue for me? And the church needs to grow in its confidence, its wisdom in how to handle that, but its confidence in dealing with that.
And I suppose one could add to that I think people are more aware recently of systemic evil and how that societies that try to live without the gospel very quickly kind of descend into a sort of Brave New World type of existence, and that creates a kind of an atmosphere. And I think there are many who pick up on that. I mean, here we've got this week in the political world, things being revealed that up until recently were consigned to wild conspiracy. And now, depressingly, you open today's newspapers and think, crikey, there's a lot of sort of folks leaning on dark forces, doing all sorts of twisted things under the cover who have gained enormous influence, power, and money. And I think when you sort of peek under the sort of the dirty carpet of that and see that, I think that has a spiritual effect. And I think the church is yet to really sort of boldly speak into that. That there is a truth there that needs to be grasped and heroically proclaimed, lest we just be seen as an arm of the state, but which the church isn't. Even the Church of England is not an arm of the state, and if at times I think you feel, oh well, the C of E isn't saying quite what I think it should be saying. Personally, I think that the right way forward is to get involved. Is to be the change, to go in and to let your voice be heard, to help correct the system. Any more questions? What? Right at the front, and then.
Hi, I'm interested in the talk of community, and you talking about the local parish church and how you've got like the new community and the old community. Do you see that as like two separate branches, or do you see that as one congregation? Because we're all loved by God, we're all built in His image. Are we one or are we not one?
Such a perceptive question. So I think that in our village, the beauty is that we really do have a synergy between those communities. And so we have lovely people who attend the morning and 1662 matins who bake cakes for the afternoon community. And it's beautiful. And we come together for the major festivals. And so we celebrate Easter and Christmas and different festivals together. And there's a real mutual joy in what we give to one another. There's a freedom for each to worship and form as an expression of the body of Christ separately. But actually, there's a real sense of being one community in our village. And I think that what's changed from where we might have been 25 years ago is that there were in certain circumstances a rejection of the old and a sense that the new is better. And there was a sense of the new generation rejecting an older generation, almost in to say we have to define ourselves against it. And now there is this desire for intergenerational relationships. And I really believe that's going to mark this. So it's a helpful opportunity for me to say this on having emphasized this Generation Z in what I presented this evening. I don't believe that this is a youth movement. I think this is a church renewal movement, so that there's one body, and because the new generation need the older, and actually as the older engages with the new, there's a renewal that takes place for that as well. And I really do believe that that's happening. So if we're in an older generation here this evening, we're not on the scrap heap. We have a role to play within the church. And what we're finding is that the younger are wanting those relationships. So that's what I found really encouraging. So it has to be both. I think there is freedom, as there often is in families, extended families, for separate spaces, different expressions, but coming together to recognize each other.
I think the persecuted church in, say, the Middle East or in China or Saudi, wherever, Nigeria, those ecumenical differences are blurred because I just remember, if you've done science, a Brownian motion, if you put pressure on a substance, on a gas, it gets more excited and there's more interaction. And I think in many of those places in the world where there's a lot of pushback and sacrifice and it's hard, there is a generosity to each other that in in the more affluent, laissez-faire, secular cultures that we've got. Until recently, that hasn't been so visible. I actually see that in university life. That's one of the things I think I've learned in the last 3 months. There is a lot more cordiality between the various Christian groups, I think, on a campus than there maybe was 20, 30 years ago, where brand really mattered. You know, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but you know, you were defined by not being the other. And I think now there's a different scenario, a different paradigm being played out. There were questions. Andy and Andy?
Thank you, John. Back to the age groups again. I was really interested by that. I've been enormously encouraged by the young people who are coming to church and in our parish, you know, joining, and they're coming in with such strong faith and such enthusiasm. It does feed you. It doesn't strengthen you, which is really great. And I would have loved that to have been the case when I was that age. Very often I was the only person taking my faith seriously when I was a teenager, in my 20s and so on and so forth. And I was interested in that Scripture Union data that you put on, where the sort of middle-aged group is the only group where that's fallen rather than risen. Yes. And I wondered, are you seeing any signs of, you know, interest from that age group outside of the church who are starting to become more spiritually awakened?
So I think that what we are seeing is the sense of their children piquing their interest. So I was literally talking to a mother and a daughter on Sunday and listening to their story, and the daughter had discovered that she wasn't baptized as a child, said, why didn't you baptize me? What was going on for you? I'm not sure that I'm okay with that. She then came to the church to talk about that, and she brought her mother. And it was just such an interesting conversation to see that something that was just very open and curious for this younger person was something that the mother had realized, no, I'd got into this box where, no, I don't do that and I don't believe that, and the church is part of this institutionalism that I've rejected. And now actually there is an openness to it. I think the big challenge is that the experience of church for an older generation when they were growing up was not positive. And so there is that negative experience in the background and a hesitancy. And so I think that's why that age group particularly has found that, that it hasn't responded in the same way. But I do see this younger generation actually beginning to bring something alive in the older generation. Yeah.
I think Gen X, your generation, we are, as REM said, we're the ones losing our religion. Yeah. We were the sort of nowhere kids, the first latch door kids. We're the children of the revolution that never got anywhere. We're the ones who have seen the beginnings of the internet digital revolution. We've had all sorts of sort of change, but we've been sort of in that shifting sands, but not quite in it. And so I think it's no surprise, in my personal view, that I think we're the generation that feel a little flat. I mean, we may be the last really to really respond to this. Joanna?
I hope I can articulate this well enough, but you pointed out that that this generation is becoming increasingly spiritual and attending church more often. But at the same time, demographically, there are things happening that suggest, how spiritual are you? For example, birth rates are plummeting, and the general adherence to progressive attitudes, which doesn't suggest a robust spirituality to me. You mentioned that, or I can't remember whether it was Father Daniel or you, Canon John, who mentioned that it tends to be the the Catholics, the Orthodox, strict Church of England that are attracting young people. But these are Christian traditions that adhere to quite strict rules,
Yeah.
right? And so I wonder whether this is kind of, it's a nice, touchy-feely kind of, I want to be with people like me, but I don't want to obey the rules. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I completely agree with you that I think that the church will recover its voice. I know we don't speak about classes, but the church will recover its voice through the working classes, because the working classes have never been willing to take any SH1T from anyone.
No.
And they'll stand up and say, men can't be women,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is the source of the vitality of the Christian church, to be honest with you. And myself and some other people in this room attend a church that is very mixed, but the vicar, self-declared working class, never closed his doors during lockdown. Never closed his doors. And that's why I go there, because it's just sort of being polite about it. He's saying, I'm not taking any of your nonsense.
That's right, yeah. Well, there's such a rich question and reflection, because statistics are never they're an example, but they're not the whole story. And so, of course, we're in a society that is still living under the inheritance of secularism and the progressive attitudes and things that are the church is wrestling with, and things that are clearly, distinctly opposed to what Scripture would teach. And so we're not in any way in. So the report, the Scripture Union entitled their report, "The Quiet Revival." In the past, the church has been revived, and when it was revived, it transformed society. It penetrated the whole of a society, whether it's the Welsh revival, where the miners stopped swearing and the horses didn't know how to obey them, and things like that. And the jails were empty, and there genuinely weren't people in prison in different parts of the community. Or whether it's the Salvation Army penetrating the working class and calling them to live in a different way, that it really did transform the whole. We're not in that place yet. But I think that what the danger for the church is that we miss the signs of what is happening. So there is something happening. It's not something you can define as a whole. It's not the completed sort of picture of what we would long for it to be. But there are signs of something stirring and God on the move in a fresh way. And we then have to learn, how do we respond? What's our responsibility in responding to that? But yeah, really helpful reflection.
My personal suspicion, or speculation for the future, would be that as the digital revolution spikes and goes to that sort of hockey stick moment, and we see all sorts of changes on that, which might include massive job losses across the spectrum, and not just in sort of manufacturing, but white collar jobs going, the creative industries being driven out of business because it's quicker to do it through AI. What that might do to us spiritually, I think, may unite even the Church of England with all its cultural wars and differences, and that, because the precipice would be so extraordinary. That what is before us in terms of societal change is, I think, the saying is operating at 10 times the speed of the Industrial Revolution. And think of what that did. Now think of that at 10 to 1,000 times in the next few years. I hope that will consolidate the church in its mission to be uncompromising in what it means to be a human being and what it means to live a meaningful life, even if that is demanding and against the grain. Right at the back, we'll have our last question and then we'll break. Go on.
I think people in church have sometimes lacked confidence in sharing their faith. And I'd love to hear from you about what you would say to somebody about why you love Jesus, why he's precious to you, and why you read the Bible and how to do that.
Well, I love talking about that because, and one of the things I think that we can say much more openly now is so what I always say is tell your story. You are, and your faith and what God has done within you is utterly fascinating to people now. And you will find ways of telling that story. And sometimes you can tell your big story. I can tell you that there was a time in my life where I had really walked far and far away from the Christian faith I was brought up in, and I was broken by it. But in my darkness, I met somebody who'd shared Jesus with me again. I turned to Jesus, and it was like he washed me clean of that darkness, and he gave me hope. And as I began to follow him, I discovered a purpose. And knowing his love for me, knowing his presence with me, having the Bible to read every day, gives me a sense of rootedness in my life that has transformed me completely and given me a purpose to live for and a joy. And you tell that story, and then you say to people, have you got anything of a story like that? Or would you like a story like that? And we share life with one another. And the other thing I always say to people is, if we love people, we will be really interested in how they are. So for me, too often the Christian faith is seen as something where we're just on broadcast mode. And actually, I'm much more interested in asking people questions, in just asking them, how are you? And what's going on for you at the moment in your life? And then listening to what that is, and then actually then helping them to understand that for me, whether it's, I've had mental health difficulties, I've seen a counselor, we've been through some marriage counseling, there's all kinds of things in my life that haven't been perfect. But Jesus Christ has been the one who at the heart of it has transformed me. And when they share their stuff and I share my stuff, and then we put Jesus in the middle of that, then actually it doesn't become me trying to persuade somebody, it's me inviting them into what Jesus has done for me so that he can do it for them. And so I think there's a real openness to share Jesus now, but we really have to learn from the past that people aren't interested in us trying to dominate them with our truth and having a truth war. But they are really interested in the person of Jesus and what he's done. And so one of my little hobby horses is you look through the New Testament, and what the early apostles did is they didn't actually present a theory about the Christian faith in terms of this is what the cross did and this is exactly what. They just talked about Jesus. They talked about we knew him, we saw him, we touched him. This is what he did, and he died on the cross, and he can save you. But it wasn't a theoretical sort of analysis of salvation. It was Jesus. And I really do think that the church has lost confidence in the greatest gift we've received, and we can recover that. But we have to, I think, have a generosity, a care for people, an interest in people, in sharing Jesus with them.
The three transcendentals are goodness, truth, and beauty. There's a famous theologian, his name escapes me, who said that the 21st century is going to be saved by beauty. It's not going to be the sort of mathematics of dogmatic truth. It's not even going to necessarily be how people behave, but it may very well be that sort of inner beauty that beguiles and enchants. We started with Choral Evensong.
Beautiful.
That just set the tone for this evening. And I think there is a profound longing for story, for beauty, for an engagement with the imagination that is otherwise lacking. If we can lean into that, there's so much of the world has got a sort of ugly, cheap face on it at the moment. And if we can kind of be the reverse of that, that often communicates you're worth it. And it may be a dozen little things in the way that we carry our lives, and that provides that engagement that says, the story behind that person's story is magnetic. We're going to conclude now, and I'd like to say a really big thank you to Canon John for his words of inspiration and encouragement. Can we please give John a big clap?